The capital for capitalism emerged in Europe as a result of 500 years of colonial plundering and theft. The theft of trillions and trillions worth of gold and treasure worldwide gave value to a concept of trading with the currency. Now, capitalism was an idea implemented on the stolen wealth, and the idea was this: invest that wealth, capture the surplus value from laboring workers, save those profits, reinvest that wealth, expand your operations, decrease worker wages to afford price cuts, and outcompete the competition so you could create a monopoly and consolidate power. Now, this process of endless growth eventually drove European nations right into each other's throats when they tried to expand their empires into each other. This deadly event is better known as World War I, and in the midst of all the death and plundering, a period came where they didn't have enough gold to fight the war anymore. So they went off the gold standard and printed money instead to finance the debt used to buy war materials. Eventually, the Allies won the war, but all the fake money they created at the time set off a worldwide credit bubble called the Roaring Twenties. In the 1930s, the mountain of credit collapsed because it couldn't be repaid. The gold wasn't there to repay it. The international banking system collapsed. International trade collapsed. The Great Depression began, and this went on for 10 years. Capitalism went completely bankrupt after cannibalizing itself, and socialist and communist parties started forming worldwide at this point, which threatened the capitalist order. Fascism grew as a perfect counter against the people's movement, so capitalist states and individuals began funding the fascists till they turned on capitalists also to expand their own empires yet again. This was known as World War II, when Germany and Japan started fighting to take over the world. The US government at this point increased spending by 900% in the 1940s to prepare for this war, and remember, this growth is not backed by anything real anymore. It's just debt, and we kept spending and spending till Japan attacked us in late 1941. This dragged us into war early, and the government at this point took complete control of the economy to run the war effort. Manufacturing, production, distribution, pricing, laboring, etc. GDP is skyrocketing now, and remember, GDP has to keep going up. The government knew reduced spending would lead us right back into the Depression, so they maintained high levels of spending, and the economy remained heavily directed by government debt ever since. This is because socialist and communist parties kept rising worldwide, threatening the capitalist order. Soviets beat Hitler so far back they took half of Europe. The Chinese revolted a few years later, taking full control of their country. Communist revolutions started to pop up everywhere, and US policymakers knew returning to the gold standard would drive us right back into the Depression and risk creating the conditions for a communist revolution inside the United States. So they kept capitalism on life support and waged war on socialist and communist ideologies instead, continuing to spending into the Cold War. Now it's the 1980s, and we ramped up government spending and borrowing intensively by cutting taxes to go along with increasing military budget to fight and overthrow people unionizing, organizing, and socializing production in other nations. At this point, the level of debt to GDP started increasing consistently, being 150% of GDP for decades, rapidly accelerating by 2007, being 370% of our GDP, into 2002 now being 779.9% of our GDP. Our system is practically completely driven by credit creation and consumption at this point. There is no real value to any of this anymore at all, and this final credit bubble is ready to burst, meaning we the people should be organizing, taking control, and transitioning out of this madness. The answer is outside of capitalism, not in it. Capitalism is dead.